They laughed at us. The empire that ruled the stars, vast beyond comprehension, gazed down upon humanity and found only weakness. To them, we were primitives, children of a fragile blue world, fighting among ourselves, wielding crude machines and fragile ships. They mocked our ambitions, dismissing us as a curiosity, a fleeting noise in the grand silence of the cosmos. To the alien empire, humanity was not a threat. We were entertainment, but laughter has a way of echoing. And when the sound of it carried across the stars, it did not crush us. It did not humble us. It lit a fire. And from that fire rose a defiance the empire could never have imagined. This is the story of how the alien empire laughed at us until we fought back. The empire in question had existed for millennia. It was not merely a collection of star systems, it was a vast hierarchy of species bound by conquest and subjugation, ruled by the Zorith dominion. They were old, ancient even, their fleets spanning hundreds of sectors, their technologies refined to near perfection. They had seen civilizations rise and fall, had absorbed countless species into their dominion, and had extinguished any spark of rebellion before it could ignite. When they first encountered Earth, their reaction was not fear but amusement. They saw our fragmented nations, our endless quarrels, our wars that destroyed more of ourselves than our enemies. They saw our weapons, nuclear fire that scorched only our own soil. They saw our ships, primitive rockets that barely brushed the edges of our solar system. To the Zorith dominion, we were not even worthy of conquest. We were a stage play, a distraction in their long reign. Their emissaries did not arrive as conquerors, but as performers mocking an audience. They broadcast messages across Earth's skies, filled with laughter and disdain. They called us children of dirt, keepers of fire, dreamers who will never touch the stars. They promised that if humanity ever tried to rise beyond its little cradle, the Dominion would watch and laugh as we fell. For many on Earth, it was terrifying. To know that a vast empire of unimaginable power saw us as insects was a crushing realization. Some argued we should remain quiet, hidden, unnoticed. But others, soldiers, dreamers, rebels, and survivors, reacted differently. They did not hear mockery. They heard a challenge. That was the moment everything began to change. In the shadows of ridicule, nations that had long distrusted one another began to whisper of unity. The Zorith Dominion's scorn had revealed something no war or treaty had ever accomplished: a common enemy. Not because the Dominion had declared war, but because they had denied us the dignity of respect. Humanity, for all its flaws, could not endure humiliation. Pride, stubborn and burning, drove us forward. Scientists worked day and night, tearing apart scraps of Dominion transmissions, analyzing every detail of their ships glimpsed in orbit, every fragment of technology that might be adapted. Militaries shifted resources, once aimed at each other, now aimed at the stars. Corporations driven by greed but cloaked in patriotism poured funding into propulsion, weapons, and cybernetics. The world was still divided, but beneath the surface, something new was forming. An unspoken pact that humanity would not remain the punchline of the galaxy. The Dominion, of course, did not notice. Why would they? To them, our efforts were nothing more than the flailing of insects. They monitored our signals, laughed at our attempts to mimic their technologies, and even encouraged our endeavors, as one might encourage a pet attempting a trick. Some Dominion broadcasts even wagered on how long before humanity destroyed itself in the process. And yet, within a generation, Earth was no longer the same. The first ships that pierced beyond our solar system were crude by Dominion standards, but to us, they were miracles. Crewed by volunteers who knew they might never return, they ventured into the void and came back with knowledge, resources, and a newfound determination. Colonies sprouted on Mars and Europa, fragile at first, but rapidly expanding. The moon became more than a symbol. It became a shipyard, a fortress, and a gateway. The Dominion chuckled, watching from afar. "Let them play," their envoys said. "They will never rise beyond toys." But humanity was no longer listening. For every mockery broadcast into our skies, millions of humans worked harder, pushed further, and dreamed bigger. And then came the first real confrontation. It happened at the edge of a mining colony orbiting Proxima Centauri. A Dominion patrol ship, sleek and monstrous, stumbled upon the human outpost. Expecting surrender, or perhaps entertainment, they announced their presence with the usual disdain. But instead of bowing, the miners armed their defenses. Primitive railguns and hastily constructed turrets fired into the void, barely scratching the Dominion hull but refusing to yield. The Dominion commander, amused, ordered a demonstration strike. One shot from their energy cannon obliterated half the colony. The laughter returned, cruel and resonant. But something unexpected followed. The surviving humans did not surrender. They launched their transports, armed them with explosives, and rammed the Dominion vessel head-on. The explosion tore through the alien ship, crippling it. The colony was lost. The miners were dead. But for the first time in millennia, a Dominion ship had been destroyed by a species they considered beneath notice. The galaxy whispered. The Dominion still laughed, but behind their laughter something else stirred. Unease. Because if there was one thing history had taught the empires, it was this. Species that refused to bow, species that would rather die striking back than live on their knees, were dangerous. For humanity, the miners of Proxima became legends. Songs were written, statues built, and stories told. They had proved that even against the most powerful empire in the galaxy, humans would not simply play their role as victims. We would fight. We would gamble. We would burn if we had to, but we would not be mocked forever. The Dominion laughed at us. But in that laughter, they made their greatest mistake. They gave humanity a reason, and humanity never lets go of a reason. The death of the Dominion ship at Proxima was dismissed at first. Officially, the Empire declared it an accident, the result of human incompetence and their own miscalculated indulgence. The Dominion's High Council even used the event in propaganda broadcasts, claiming it as proof of humanity's barbaric nature. Primitive creatures who could only destroy themselves in the act of resistance. But beneath the veneer of mockery, the Dominion had taken notice. They dispatched observers, cloaked vessels hidden at the edges of human colonies, watching and recording. They tracked our resource movements, our shipbuilding rates, even our cultural responses. What they found was unsettling. Instead of collapsing under the weight of Proxima's tragedy, humanity had rallied. The miners were martyrs now, their names etched into the collective memory of every colony. Children learned their story in schools, and volunteers flocked to enlist in the new defense fleets. Where the Dominion expected despair, there was instead unity. Where they expected surrender, there was resolve. Earth, fractured for centuries by politics and rivalries, was transforming under the pressure of humiliation and survival. Nations that once fought bitterly for dominance began to pool resources into joint projects. A council was formed, not a world government, but something new, an alliance of necessity. They called it the Accord. Its purpose was not governance, but survival, and its mandate was simple. Humanity would no longer laugh with the Dominion. Humanity would answer. The Accord pushed humanity's technology to its breaking point. Railguns were scaled to monstrous sizes, plasma torches were weaponized, and experimental drives turned once primitive ships into vessels capable of skirting the edges of Dominion space. Drones, swarms, and cybernetic enhancements were designed not for elegance, but for brutality. It was not beauty humanity sought. It was effectiveness the Dominion watching could not understand. Other species, when confronted with their superiority, had submitted, integrated, or quietly disappeared. Humanity's refusal to accept ridicule seemed irrational. To the Dominion, it was inefficiency. To humanity, it was identity. The second confrontation came not by accident, but by intent. A Dominion envoy ship entered orbit around Titan, one of humanity's fastest-growing colonies. They expected compliance. Instead, they found the colony bristling with weapon platforms, its skies swarming with fighters. The envoy transmitted demands for surrender, laughter echoing in every syllable. The Titan Accord commander responded with silence and then unleashed everything. The battle was brutal. Dominion firepower was overwhelming, and hundreds of human craft were torn apart in seconds. But the colony had prepared for this moment with cunning, not brute force. They lured the Dominion vessel into a kill zone of orbital mines, sacrificed entire wings of fighters to bait its shields, and finally crippled it with a railgun barrage fired from Titan's surface. For the first time, not only had humanity destroyed a Dominion ship, but they had done so deliberately, with intent. The reaction across the galaxy was seismic. Smaller species, long oppressed, whispered in awe. Could it be that the children of dirt had struck the Empire? Could it be that they had drawn blood where countless others had failed? For the first time in centuries, hope flickered in the hearts of the enslaved. The Dominion did not laugh this time. Instead, they grew angry. Fleets were mobilized, not to conquer humanity outright, but to teach a lesson. The High Council declared humans an amusing nuisance that had forgotten its place. Punitive expeditions were launched against colonies on the frontier, and so began the first true war between humanity and the Dominion. At first, the battles were hopelessly lopsided. Dominion fleets were vast, their weapons refined by millennia of use. Human fleets were fragile, pieced together with ingenuity and desperation. Worlds burned. Colonies were erased in flashes of energy. Millions died. The Accord reeled under the weight of the Empire's wrath. And yet, the Dominion underestimated something vital. Humanity was not fighting to win a war in the conventional sense. Humanity was fighting to refuse defeat. Every loss became fuel for vengeance. Every atrocity strengthened the resolve of survivors. Soldiers fought even when outnumbered. Civilians smuggled weapons and sabotaged invaders. And colonies that had no hope of surviving still chose to strike before falling. The Dominion was accustomed to species folding after a single devastating blow. They had never faced an enemy that only grew stronger with each wound. The turning point came at Vega. The Dominion fleet expected another swift victory, another burned colony. Instead, they encountered something new. The first true human war fleet, assembled in secret and armed with weapons the Dominion had not anticipated. Among them were the Shadows, stealth ships designed to slip through enemy lines, strike supply ships, and vanish. Railguns had been upgraded with magnetically accelerated slugs powerful enough to pierce Dominion shielding at close range. And most terrifying of all, humanity had perfected kamikaze drones. Swarms of autonomous craft that latched onto Dominion vessels and detonated with devastating precision. The Battle of Vega was chaos. Human fleets did not fight with elegance. They fought with fury. They sacrificed ships to cripple larger vessels, used asteroid fields as weapons, and turned the very environment into traps. Dominion commanders were bewildered. Their strategies, refined against countless foes, collapsed under the sheer unpredictability of human tactics. When the smoke cleared, the Dominion fleet was in ruins. Humanity had paid a terrible price, tens of thousands dead, half their ships destroyed. But the impossible had happened. The Dominion had been defeated in open battle. The galaxy erupted. For the first time, a young species had stood against the greatest empire and drawn blood not once, but twice. Whispers became shouts, and shouts became movements. Rebellions stirred in Dominion-controlled worlds, emboldened by the thought that if humanity could fight back, perhaps they could too. The Dominion High Council was outraged. They no longer laughed. Humanity, once a joke, was becoming a problem, and problems had to be erased, so they declared war. Not a punitive campaign, not a show of force, but total eradication. Humanity would not be mocked any longer. Humanity would be annihilated, and humanity smiled. Because for the first time, the species that had mocked them now took them seriously. And in that recognition, Humanity found exactly what it had been fighting for. The Dominion had laughed at us, but now they would hear something else, the sound of defiance, the sound of war, the sound of humanity refusing to kneel. The declaration of total war changed everything. No longer would the Dominion toy with humanity as a curiosity. They would unleash their full might. Fleets that stretched across sectors, legions of soldiers bred for war, and weapons that had ended entire civilizations in the past. To them, the campaign was not a battle, but an extermination. They believed humanity would burn swiftly, like all the others before. But humanity was not like the others. The Accord braced for annihilation. Earth itself became a fortress, its orbit lined with defensive stations and vast cannons that could shatter asteroids. The moon's shipyards roared to life, producing vessels at a rate that shocked even the Dominion observers. Colonies volunteered resources without hesitation, their populations understanding that survival depended on sacrifice. Even fractured nations on Earth that had once resisted the Accord now funneled everything they had into the war. It was no longer about pride. It was survival, plain and simple. The Dominion struck first at the colonies nearest their borders. Entire fleets descended on Arcturus, Sirius, and Deneb, their weapons cutting through human defenses like fire through paper. Millions died in days, and the galaxy watched with grim silence. Other species whispered that humanity had overreached, that perhaps the laughter had been justified after all. But then came the resistance. At Sirius, when the colony's defenses fell, survivors did not flee. They sabotaged their own infrastructure, detonating fuel reserves that consumed Dominion ground forces in firestorms. At Arcturus, miners armed with nothing but explosives and stolen rifles held off Dominion troops for weeks, turning tunnels into graves. At Deneb, civilians hijacked transport vessels and crashed them into Dominion carriers, crippling them before they could retreat. These were not victories in the traditional sense. Humanity lost those colonies, but the message was clear. No battle would be easy. Every inch of ground would cost the Dominion blood and steel. And the Empire, so accustomed to clean and swift conquest, found itself mired in endless defiance. The Accord realized that direct confrontation would always favor the Dominion. Their fleets were too powerful, their technology too advanced. So humanity embraced something different. They did not fight as soldiers alone. They fought as hunters, saboteurs, and insurgents. Stealth ships prowled the edges of Dominion supply lines, striking freighters and vanishing. Drone swarms harassed convoys, forcing the Empire to spread its forces thin. Colonists turned their worlds into death traps, seeding orbital mines, hacking Dominion communication relays, and building false signals to lure ships into ambushes. This unpredictability was humanity's weapon. The Dominion had refined their strategies over thousands of years, but their perfection made them rigid. Humanity thrived in chaos. The Empire grew frustrated. Each victory came at greater cost than anticipated. Each destroyed colony birthed legends that spread across human space, strengthening resistance instead of breaking it. Soldiers who survived Dominion assaults became symbols, their names carried in songs and speeches. Humanity was forging an identity out of rebellion. The Dominion High Council convened, demanding answers from their generals. How could primitives, barely out of their cradle, inflict such damage? The generals had no answers. Their strategies had always worked before. Why not now? The truth, though unspoken, was this. Humanity was fighting with something the Dominion had long forgotten. Desperation. The Empire had grown fat on victory, its people complacent, its soldiers trained to expect submission. Humanity, by contrast, had lived in conflict for as long as it had existed. War was not alien to us, it was our history, our inheritance. The turning point came at Epsilon Eridani. The Dominion launched a massive assault, expecting to wipe out one of humanity's most critical colonies. The Accord, knowing they could not match the Dominion fleet head-on, devised a trap. They seeded the system with hidden mines, deployed decoy fleets broadcasting exaggerated signals, and rigged the planet's surface with explosives. When the Dominion fleet arrived, they believed they had caught humanity unprepared. They laughed again, broadcasting taunts as they descended, but then the mines detonated, tearing through their vanguard. The decoys drew their ships into a kill zone where railguns hidden on asteroids opened fire, and when Dominion troops landed on the surface, the ground itself erupted, swallowing them in fire. The battle lasted 3 days. In the end, half the Dominion fleet lay in ruins. Humanity had lost thousands, yes, but they had forced the Empire into retreat. For the first time, humanity had not merely resisted. They had won. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Species enslaved for generations whispered of rebellion. Some even reached out to humanity in secret, offering intelligence, resources, and hidden sanctuaries. The Accord grew stronger, no longer alone. What had begun as mockery was becoming a movement. The Dominion could feel the shift. Their empire was built on fear, and humanity was eroding it. The laughter that had once echoed across the stars was gone, replaced by silence, and beneath that silence, dread. Because the Dominion finally understood what they were facing. Humanity was not the strongest, the fastest, or the most advanced, but they were relentless. They would not break. They would fight until their last breath, and in doing so, they would drag even the mightiest empire into the abyss. The High Council swore that humanity would be crushed before their defiance spread. They poured more fleets, more soldiers, more resources into the war than ever before. It was no longer about punishment. It was survival for them, for humanity. It was proof that the Empire was afraid. The galaxy had laughed at us. But now the galaxy began to wonder. Could it be that these fragile children of Earth might succeed where no one else had? Could it be that humanity was not a joke, but a spark? And sparks, given enough fuel, could burn empires. The aftermath of Epsilon Eridani rippled far beyond human space. For the first time in centuries, the iron grip of the Dominion had slipped, and every enslaved species took notice. Whispers of resistance became open conversations. Secret networks that had lain dormant for generations came alive, emboldened by the audacity of humanity's stand. For the Accord, the victory was more than strategic, it was symbolic. Humanity had proven that the Dominion could bleed, and in that proof, others found courage. The first to reach out were the Veil, a species known for their cautious pragmatism. They had lived under Dominion rule for centuries, their culture smothered, their fleets dismantled. Yet they had preserved knowledge, hidden caches of technology, and a burning resentment beneath their veneer of obedience. Through coded transmissions, they made contact with the Accord, offering intelligence in exchange for partnership. Soon after came the Cathari, nomads who had been hunted nearly to extinction. They had no worlds left, no fleets of their own, only scattered clans eking out survival in the shadows of space. But they knew the Dominion's patrol routes, their blind spots, and their weaknesses. To them, humanity's defiance was not madness, it was kinship. They pledged themselves to the fight. As these alliances grew, the Dominion's nightmare began to take shape. Humanity was not simply fighting back, they were igniting a galaxy-wide resistance. The Accord, though still fragile, embraced this role. Human strategists worked with alien dissidents to coordinate strikes across multiple sectors. Where once the Dominion's forces crushed resistance piecemeal, they now faced dozens of uprisings at once. Supply lines stretched thin, fleets diverted to quell revolts, and whispers of rebellion even reached within their own ranks. Still, the Dominion did not falter easily. Their fleets descended with fury upon any world that dared defy them. Entire cities were burned as warnings. Populations were culled to instill fear. Yet with every atrocity, their grip loosened further. Fear no longer paralyzed the oppressed, it fueled them. Humanity understood this intimately. For generations, their own history had been scarred with oppression, conquest, and rebellion. They taught their allies not just tactics, but resilience. They shared stories of Earth's struggles, of revolutions, of wars won against impossible odds, of moments when freedom had seemed unattainable, but was seized through sheer determination. These stories spread like wildfire, reminding every species that the Dominion's power was not invincible. The Dominion Council grew desperate. They launched massive offensives against the Accord, hoping to cut out the heart of the rebellion before it spread further. Earth itself became their ultimate target. "Break the cradle and the child dies," one counselor declared. Fleets moved toward the Sol system with a single intent: annihilation. The Accord prepared for the storm. Every shipyard poured out vessels. Every colony funneled resources. Earth's skies darkened with the silhouettes of warships, orbital platforms, and swarms of drones. The moon's surface glittered with railguns and missile silos. For the first time in history, humanity stood united, not against itself, but against a common enemy. And when the Dominion fleet arrived, the largest ever assembled against humanity, the battle that followed shook the galaxy. It began with the silence of the void, broken by the thunder of weapons as the Dominion advanced. Their confidence was absolute. They had crushed rebellions before. They would crush this one. But humanity had learned. The Accord's fleets did not meet the Dominion in open formation. Instead, they fractured, attacking from multiple angles, weaving chaos into the heart of the Empire's order. Stealth ships slipped behind enemy lines, crippling carriers. Drone swarms overwhelmed interceptors. Asteroids, rigged with engines and explosives, became weapons hurled into the fleet. The Dominion laughed no longer. The battle raged for days. Earth itself trembled as orbital strikes scorched its skies. But humanity refused to yield. Ground forces fought in ruined cities, civilians armed themselves in desperate defense, and the Accord poured everything they had into holding the line. At last, in a maneuver that would be remembered for centuries, the Accord sacrificed half their fleet to lure the Dominion's flagship into range of Earth's orbital cannons. The weapons fired as one, tearing the ship apart in a blaze of fire visible from the planet's surface. The loss of their flagship shattered the Dominion's morale. Their fleet faltered, commanders hesitated, and the Accord seized the moment. In a final, furious push, they drove the Empire back. Earth had survived. Humanity had endured, and the Dominion had suffered its greatest humiliation. The galaxy erupted in celebration. On worlds far beyond human space, oppressed peoples rose in rebellion. Statues of Dominion rulers were torn down. Garrisons were overrun, and banners of freedom were raised. The Dominion, once untouchable, was now vulnerable. For humanity, the victory was bittersweet. The cost was staggering. Cities lay in ruins, millions were dead, and fleets reduced to wreckage. Yet the Accord stood taller than ever. They were no longer the children of dirt mocked by an ancient empire. They were leaders of a galactic movement. The Dominion Council raged, vowing vengeance. But deep within their ranks, cracks began to form. Some questioned the wisdom of underestimating humanity. Others feared that even if humanity were destroyed, the rebellion they had sparked would never die. The truth was undeniable. The Dominion had laughed at humanity, mocked them, dismissed them as insignificant. But now, the laughter had turned to silence, and silence in the heart of an empire is more dangerous than any sound. For silence is the sound of fear, and fear had finally come for the Dominion. The Dominion had never known true fear. For millennia their fleets had brought order to chaos, conquest to the weak, subjugation to the unruly. Their enemies always broke, their subjects always submitted, their power always endured. Yet now, for the first time in living memory, the Empire felt the creeping chill of uncertainty. It began in whispers within their court. Councillors, once united in arrogance, spoke with hushed voices of the human problem. Some argued that the Empire should redirect its might elsewhere, abandoning the costly campaign. Others demanded absolute eradication, even if it drained the Empire's coffers and fractured its fleets. That debate alone revealed a weakness the galaxy had not seen before: disunity. Meanwhile, humanity and their allies pressed the advantage. The Accord knew they could not match the Dominion ship for ship, but they did not need to. Every strike, every act of defiance, every small victory added cracks to the Empire's facade of invulnerability. The Kethari clans, once scattered and hunted, struck supply convoys with precision, their intimate knowledge of the outer routes leaving Dominion fleets stranded. The Veil planted insurgents within Dominion-controlled worlds, sabotaging factories and cutting communications. And everywhere humanity fought, they fought with a ferocity that stunned their allies. They were not simply resisting, they were teaching others how to resist. Entire sectors began to unravel. Worlds that had been under Dominion control for centuries rose in rebellion. some declaring independence, others pledging allegiance to the Accord. Garrisons were overwhelmed, and Dominion governors found themselves besieged in their own palaces. The Empire responded with brutal reprisals. They unleashed fleets to raise rebel planets to send a message of terror, but their strategy backfired. The more they burned, the more hatred they sowed. The more they punished, the more resistance grew. Humanity understood this paradox better than most. Throughout their history, from ancient empires to modern wars, they had seen oppression backfire time and again. They leaned into that knowledge, broadcasting the Dominion's atrocities across the stars. Images of slaughtered colonies, of burning cities, of families torn apart became rallying cries for billions who had once lived in silence. The Accord, for all its losses, became a beacon. They were not the strongest, but they were the spark, and sparks ignite infernos. It was in this chaos that humanity dared the unthinkable. They took the war not just to contested systems, but deep into Dominion space itself. The mission was codenamed Ashfall. A fleet of stealth ships carrying human and alien commandos infiltrated one of the Dominion's core worlds. Their target was not military, it was symbolic. The Vault of Triumph, a colossal monument where the Empire displayed relics of every civilization it had conquered. Weapons, banners, artifacts, entire histories reduced to trophies. For centuries, the vault had stood as proof of the Dominion's eternal supremacy. To strike it was madness. To destroy it was unthinkable, but humanity understood symbols. The commandos struck with surgical precision. Explosives tore through the vault's foundations. Fire consumed artifacts that had been held in chains for ages. And when the smoke cleared, the Dominion's greatest monument lay in ruins. The galaxy shook. For the oppressed, it was proof that even the untouchable could fall. For the Dominion, it was humiliation beyond measure. The Council raged, but the damage was done. The Empire's aura of invincibility had shattered. Rebellion spread like wildfire. On distant mining colonies, workers seized control. On agricultural worlds, farmers armed with nothing but tools drove Dominion troops from their fields. On entire planets, governors surrendered rather than face uprisings they could no longer suppress. Humanity had given them courage, but with courage came a terrible cost. The Dominion, pushed to desperation, unleashed weapons long kept hidden. Planetary bombardments scorched entire biospheres. Biological plagues were seeded in rebel systems. Worlds were sacrificed in the name of order. The Accord fought to counter these horrors, but every victory came at staggering losses. Entire fleets were reduced to wreckage. Colonies were turned to ash. Civilians paid the highest price, and every human soldier knew that survival was never guaranteed. And yet, through it all they endured. Humanity had been underestimated, mocked, dismissed as fragile children of a dirt world. But now they stood at the center of a galactic storm, their defiance echoed by billions across the stars. The laughter of the Empire had turned to silence, and silence had given way to fear. The Dominion was no longer asking whether humanity could be crushed. They were asking whether the Empire itself could survive. The galaxy had shifted. The balance of power was breaking, and in the heart of the chaos, humanity found its answer to the question that had haunted them since the beginning. Were they truly insignificant? No, they were the match that lit the fire, and that fire was consuming an empire. The Dominion had once been a mountain, unyielding, immovable, towering above all others. But mountains erode, not with one storm, but with countless winds and relentless rains. Humanity and their allies had become that storm, and the cracks were spreading. In the Empire's heartworlds, whispers turned into shouts. Citizens who had never known war found themselves rationed, taxed, and conscripted to fuel the endless campaign. Governors, once secure, feared uprisings. Even among the Dominion's proud military, murmurs of dissent grew. Soldiers began to question why they were spilling blood on distant worlds against an enemy that refused to die. The Accord's leaders saw an opportunity. They realized the war was no longer about matching the Dominion fleet for fleet. It was about collapsing their will. To win, humanity had to make the Empire doubt itself. So they launched a campaign of audacity. Human fleets struck not at outer colonies but at supply hubs deep in enemy space. Stealth teams infiltrated Dominion command centers, broadcasting recordings of their failures across the Empire. Even more daring, a joint human veil strike force hijacked a Dominion propaganda relay and replaced its broadcasts with a simple message. You called us fragile. You called us weak. You laughed. Who is laughing now? The message spread faster than the Empire could suppress it. On enslaved worlds, cheers erupted. On Dominion core planets, outrage and shame seethed. And for the first time in millennia, the Empire's aura of invulnerability shattered, not from battle, but from humiliation. Yet every act of defiance carried a price. Humanity bled for every victory. On the colony of Helios Prime, Accord forces held off a Dominion siege for months, only to be annihilated when relief fleets failed to arrive. At Orion's Reach, a fleet of human carriers was ambushed and destroyed, leaving thousands of families grieving in silence. Still, they endured. Humanity had something the Dominion could not understand. Something no empire, no matter how ancient, could fabricate. It was the bond of survival, the refusal to surrender even when logic dictated defeat. For humanity, survival was not just instinct, it was identity. The Dominion, blinded by arrogance, failed to grasp this truth. They unleashed horrors meant to terrify, but each horror became fuel. When they burned cities, humanity rebuilt. When they slaughtered civilians, humanity vowed vengeance. When they destroyed worlds, humanity turned rubble into fortresses. But as the rebellion spread, so too did the cost of leadership. The Accord was stretched to its limits, its fleets scattered across dozens of battlefronts. Supplies dwindled, officers were overworked, and morale frayed. Humanity had lit the fire, but keeping it alive demanded sacrifice upon sacrifice. It was in this crucible that a bold idea was born. Admiral Kalen, one of the Accord's most ruthless strategists, proposed an offensive unlike any before. Instead of defending, instead of striking symbols, they would aim for the heart, the Dominion's throne world itself. The plan was madness. The throne world was the most fortified planet in the galaxy, guarded by fleets larger than entire sectors. No enemy had ever reached its skies, much less threatened its surface. To even attempt it seemed suicidal, but Admiral Kalen argued that victory was not about destroying the throne world, it was about proving that even the Empire's heart was vulnerable. One strike, one scar on their greatest pride, would do more damage than 100 battles won elsewhere. The Accord debated furiously. Many feared the loss of resources, the inevitable slaughter, but in the end they agreed. Desperation breeds boldness, and humanity had nothing left to lose. The operation was codenamed Iron Dawn. Fleets were assembled in secret. Alien allies pledged their best ships, their most skilled warriors, their most desperate hopes. The Cathari clans risked everything, offering the last of their ancestral war vessels. The Veil supplied stealth technology stolen from Dominion factories. Even smaller species, once too timid to act, poured what little they had into the cause. For the first time, the rebellion was not merely human-led. It was united. When the fleets departed, silence hung heavy across the galaxy. Billions watched in hope and fear. The Dominion mocked the attempt, declaring it the final folly of a doomed species. But beneath their laughter was a tremor. Iron Dawn pierced the borders of Dominion space like a dagger. Fleets clashed in brutal battles, each system burning as humanity and their allies carved a path forward. Casualties mounted at a horrifying pace, but still they advanced. At last, the throne world appeared in their sights, its colossal defense grid glittering like a wall of fire. Dominion fleets swarmed to intercept, and the largest battle of the war began. The Accord did not expect to win in the traditional sense. Their objective was simple: survive long enough to reach the planet's orbit and deliver their blow. Hours turned into days as the battle raged. Human destroyers collided with Dominion cruisers, sacrificing themselves to open paths. Alien strike teams boarded enemy carriers, sabotaging them from within. Entire fleets were lost in the chaos. And then, against all odds, humanity reached the throne world. A single carrier, battered and aflame, broke through the defense grid. On board were commandos armed with explosives powerful enough to scar the planet's surface. They descended through fire, through atmosphere, through storms of plasma fire, and they landed. The Dominion laughed no longer. Explosions tore through their most sacred city. Palaces burned, monuments crumbled. The very ground shook with the fury of defiance. For the first time in its history, the throne world had been struck by an enemy hand. The commandos did not survive. The carrier was destroyed, but their sacrifice achieved its purpose. The message was clear. Not even the heart of the Empire was safe. The galaxy erupted. On world after world, rebellion spread uncontrollably. Species that had once hidden their resistance now rose openly. Dominion governors were assassinated, their fleets sabotaged, their soldiers hunted. Humanity had proven the unthinkable. The Dominion was not eternal. The Empire that had laughed at them, dismissed them, mocked their struggle, was now bleeding at its core. And though the war was far from over, the tide had turned. Humanity had shown the galaxy what no one had dared believe. Empires fall, and the weak, if they refuse to break, can change the stars. The strike on the throne world changed everything. For millennia, the Dominion had ruled through an illusion of permanence. They were the mountain, unshakable, eternal. But when fire rained upon their capital, when their monuments lay in rubble and their palaces burned, the illusion shattered. Across the galaxy, species who had once whispered in fear now shouted in defiance. Rebellions that had been scattered and isolated erupted in unison. Mines stopped producing, factories halted, slave soldiers turned their weapons against their masters. The Empire had relied on obedience, but now that obedience dissolved like sand in water. For humanity, the strike was more than symbolic. It proved that daring could topple giants. And so the Accord doubled down. No longer content to defend, no longer satisfied with skirmishes, they began to orchestrate campaigns aimed not just at survival, but at dismantling the Dominion itself. The cost was staggering. Each victory demanded oceans of sacrifice. Entire fleets were lost as they pushed deeper into Dominion space. Worlds burned on both sides. Families across human and alien territories wept for sons and daughters who would never return. But the momentum was undeniable. The tide was turning. Inside the Dominion Council, cracks widened into fractures. The Hawks demanded total annihilation of humanity, even if it meant burning half the galaxy in the process. The pragmatists urged withdrawal, claiming the Empire should consolidate what remained rather than risk collapse. The debates grew vicious, and whispers of coups spread through the court. For the first time in ages, the Dominion was not united. Humanity exploited this chaos with relentless cunning. Through captured transmissions, the Accord sowed disinformation, deepening the Council's divisions. Through sabotage, they crippled fleets before they could rally. Through propaganda, they broadcast their victories into Dominion space, turning citizens against their rulers. And as rebellions multiplied, humanity took on a new role. No longer just the spark, they became the symbol. On alien worlds, statues of human soldiers began to appear. Primitive at first, carved from stone or metal scrap, but powerful in meaning. Songs were written of the humans who had refused to break, who had endured when all logic said they should fall. The galaxy no longer mocked them, it revered them. Yet humanity knew better than to let pride blind them. They had studied history, their own and others. They knew that hubris could be deadlier than any enemy, so they remained wary, cautious even as victory loomed closer. Still, the Dominion was far from finished. Though weakened, it remained a leviathan, its fleets vast, its armies brutal, and in its desperation, it became more dangerous than ever. On the colony of Vera's fall, the Dominion unleashed a weapon of planetary annihilation. In moments, the world was stripped of life, reduced to ash and silence. Billions of voices vanished. It was a message. The Empire would not go quietly, but instead of breaking spirits, Vera's fall ignited fury. Entire sectors joined the rebellion overnight. To them, there was no choice left: fight or be erased. The Accord understood the stakes. If the Dominion was willing to obliterate worlds, then time was running out. They needed a decisive blow. Not a symbolic strike, not a rebellion, but a killing wound to the Empire itself. Thus, the plan emerged. Operation Eclipse. Unlike Iron Dawn, Eclipse was not about striking the heart world. It was about cutting the Empire's throat. Intelligence from Veil insurgents revealed that the Dominion's power relied on a colossal energy nexus hidden in the Talros system. This nexus powered their fleets, their weapons, their very infrastructure. Destroy it, and the Empire would stagger. But the nexus was not undefended. It was shielded by fleets larger than anything humanity had ever faced, by fortresses bristling with weapons, by layers of automated defenses that could annihilate entire armadas. To reach it, the Accord would have to gamble everything, and humanity was ready to gamble. Preparation consumed months. Fleets were rebuilt, supplies hoarded, alliances reinforced. Every soldier knew the stakes. This was not just another battle. This was the gamble that could end the war or end humanity itself. The galaxy watched in silence. Billions prayed, cursed, or held their breath. Even within Dominion space, whispers spread. If they strike Talros, the Empire may fall. When the Accord fleet finally assembled, it stretched across the void like a scar. Human vessels stood alongside Veil stealth ships, Cathari war clans, and countless smaller species who had pledged their lives to this final stand. For the first time in history, the oppressed had become united. As the fleet set course for Talros, every soldier carried the same thought. The Dominion had laughed at them. But by the end of this, the galaxy would know that humanity was no joke. The approach was brutal. Dominion fleets intercepted them at every turn, forcing battles in contested systems. Casualties mounted, but the Accord pressed forward, refusing to turn back. With every lost ship, with every fallen comrade, their resolve only hardened. Finally, after weeks of blood and fire, the Talros system loomed ahead, and with it, the final gamble of an entire species. The stage was set. The battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy was about to begin.